setup. We are looking forward to rotation. I mean, looking forward to is a strong term maybe, but rotation is coming up, let's say. And what do you think Standard's going to look like in the aftermath?
Admittedly, that's probably not something I can talk that much about because it goes into my knowledge of Bloomborough.
Come
But
on, we're all friends here. give us something, you know.
But I imagine we see a lot of change as there's key cards from almost every major deck rotating. So decks will be looking to do much different things than they do right now.
All right, so let's go down to the action. Max with a Keepable 7, hooray! Novice Inspector potentially on 1, straight into Gleeful Demolition onto Voldaren Epicure as well. And Anim Pakal. This hand is straight gas.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of we talked about Max needing like strong hands for something like this, and this is exactly the sort of hand they need for this matchup. Just turn 2 Knight Errant if Max can find any red land. Well, no longer the case would be really what they want to get this game going and maybe be on the front foot a little in the early game.
All right. Meanwhile, though, Ian took care of that Novice Inspector and has the Fugitive Codebreaker. That has haste, so it's coming down. And now the mana a little bit awkward here for Max. Wasn't able to use Cavern because that doesn't cost both Epicure and the Novice Inspector. And now the Sundown Pass coming in taps. But it does mean that Max could set up some nice turns coming up. I think... So can Max actually play the Knight Errant next turn?
Yeah, they can if they want to. It would mean putting the Cavern on Vampire to actually play the Voldaren Epicure because they don't have double red at the moment. But yeah, putting the Cavern on Vampire, playing Epicure, or drawing another creature, lets them deploy the Knight Errant when they want to, but might be better for them to wait a little bit to try and find a turn where the curve works out more naturally than right now.
Right. I mean, you know, everyone kind of, not everyone, but a lot of people, especially control players, and I've definitely fallen into this trap before, have this kind of a little bit of a chip on our shoulders sometimes about aggro, and we're always thinking, oh, aggro decks, you know, you just put your creatures, turn them sideways, and you kind of think, oh, maybe there's a reputation of aggro maybe being a little bit easier to play, but actually when it comes down to these modern aggro decks, there are a lot of small decisions, a lot of edges and sequencing technical play that you have to get right or you're going to suffer the consequences. And here Max setting it up, keeping that untapped land on top while staring down Slickshot Show Off on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, and Show Off is really the card that makes this deck tick. I mean, if we look at the amount of pressure it's representing with just a single spell or two, this is what the Boros deck really struggles with. Without much removal, Max is just probably going to die in a turn or two and doesn't really have a way of applying an equivalent amount of pressure.
Right. Max doesn't really have an Immidane's Recruiter just yet. That might help with this. It's going to make this board go wide, though. The Gleeful Demolition coming down, Anim Pakal coming down, and Knight Errant as well, able to come down. And I think there's even a creature attacking available to make the gnome. So Max, looking for the recruiter, finds a recruiter.
Yeah, and I think if Max does get another turn, then they're pretty likely to win. I would say they're getting another turn is also pretty unlikely to happen. Gruul Aggro deck is really around of turns in spots like this, casting a bunch of spells to kill your opponent from a medium-high life total.
Okay, well, Questing Druid found Ancestral Anger, and Kumano's going to flip. That creates another haste creature. So currently there's at least 4 damage coming through. With Ancestral Anger, we're going to see Prowess Triggered plus Prowess Triggers plus its own pump ability as well. And all that leaves is all the mystery that's left really is what is in Ian's hand and whether that can be enough.
Yeah, okay. Any non-creature spell here. Oh, yeah, it should be exactly enough.
And that is exactly enough. Kumano comes down. That pings for 1. Six shot show off is 7 in the air, cannot block more than 9, and Max is going to go down on turn number 4? Question mark?
Yeah. So, a slow start for the red-green deck, really.
Yeah, positively glacial for them. But wow, Slick Shot Show Off really kind of doing its thing there. And Arya, exactly as you said, this Boros deck seems like it's going to have some trouble dealing with all of those threats, as you see Max immediately bring in all of the removal, destroy evils, get lost coming in at the sideboard.
Yeah, you really want to be low to the ground and more trim in a matchup like this. So cheap removal and some of those expensive threats like Unimpakal we saw have a bunch of copies removed. Definitely things you want to lean on less than game one. You want to minimize the number of 3-drops you have. So, I mean, the deck needs a certain amount to function, but you don't want more than the bare minimum because you'd rather just be low to the ground efficiently interacting. Tapping out for a 3-drop like we saw there, very often likely to end up with you just losing the game on the spot.
Right. And yeah, you see there Max trimming down on those 3s, bringing in the removal. Let's see if it's going to be enough as we go to game number 2. Ian, with Gruul Aggro, 1 game up already. Max is going to be on the play this time. And another reasonable hand, Novice Inspector, Epicure, Resolute Reinforcements, and a crucial removal spell for a big threat.
Yeah, and I mean, this is pretty close to the best you can hope for on a 7 out of this deck. Again, we're seeing a lot of mana issues, which is pretty problematic. Just not being able to reliably deploy your 1s and 2s because of a tap land, really rough for this deck. And the reason why it doesn't play that many, but you need to play at least a few to make the mana actually work in the first place.
Right. Yeah, this Sundown Pass has really been the bane of Max's existence for the last couple of turns. Max says, may as well just play an untap land now. And the Sundown Pass, that's going to be untapped next turn. But look at this. Max has had full of white spells, and they're going to be kind of stuck doing one thing a turn for the foreseeable future, Arya.
Yeah, really an example of the one of the failed cases of this deck where you just don't draw enough white sources and your hand is full of them, or don't draw enough red sources. Just 2-color aggro deck's gonna be a pretty tough spot, particularly when you're critical mass and trying to deploy a bunch of spells. And this is an example of that.
Yeah, oh my goodness, another white spell. Yeah, I mean, we've seen these lists kind of try to change the mana base up a little bit. We've seen some we see some Thran portals, I believe. Battlefield Forge, obviously, the Pingland still in there as well. But yeah, ultimately, it's not easy to make it work and to get everything kind of cast and compliant for sure.
Yeah, and it's a pretty tough spot for Max here, where it's either interact with the setup Ian has going on, or they can play to the board, but not really both. And either way, it's kind of putting Max further and further behind, where if they interact with the board and don't deploy anything, then they're just a long way off applying pressure, and Ian has a lot of time to set up. But at the same time, if they deploy things to the board slowly, like playing out a Resolute Reinforcement, they're definitely just going to get run over by the threats Ian already has out.
All right. And Ian is going to be adding more to the board. Monastery Swiftspear comes down, Ancestral Anger comes down. That Codebreaker now has Trample, and it's a 5/3. And yeah, Arya, you kind of talked about this before the match even started. Does seem like a little bit of a nightmare for Max, and Plains a great draw here for Max.
Yeah, might be a little too late though, particularly with the Epicure gone, the Knight Errant can't be run out this turn, and that in particular is really rough, where Max doesn't even have that many threats going on, really needs to put something that's going to start attacking on the board and maybe recoup some cards to apply a little more pressure.
All right, back over to Ian's turn, and there's the Slick Shot Shelf. Oh my goodness. And the festivities out the board for Gruul. Take care of the board. Massive attack in. Max is going down to just 5 life, and there really isn't anything in the deck that can kind of bring them back from this position at least that is in hand for them. They're going to keep digging though, cracking the clue. Can they find anything? Well, at least that's another blocker.
I believe this is not technically lethal for Ian, but I have a hard time imagining him losing from the spot. He seems pretty far ahead, and once again, we're back in a spot where basically any spell is going to kill Max.
6-shot show off at number 2 comes down. Bloodthirsty Adversary comes down. No flashback from the graveyard, but it is just going to be the full send. And Arya, technically not dead, the best kind of not dead.
Well, I don't think Max would agree here. They would really rather be in this game and able to mount a comeback, but unfortunately, the deck doesn't really have the tools for that. The deck very much built around playing from ahead and trying to leverage cards like Knight Errant that require board presence, so don't really work in a spot like this.
All right, well, that is going to be it. And you see the GGs being extended there. Ian with Gruul Aggro taking down this one 2-0, flying over the top of Convoke deck. And I can see why this Gruul Aggro list has been dominating the tournament tables, Arya.
Yeah, it's just really hard to beat if you're not well prepared for it. It's one of those decks where if you respect it, if you have the removal spells, then you can line up pretty well against it. Most mid-range decks can beat it that way. But if you don't respect it, it's just faster than anything else that's happening in standard. And so trying to erase it or goldfish past it is just really a losing proposition and leads to the deck winning a lot of the time. And that's where it gets a lot of its percentage points in terms of win rate.
All right. Okay. I mean, that was Gruul Aggro against Boros Convoke, but we do have more magic from round number 5 to bring you. And for the fans of the cool decks that we saw last round, I have good news for you because we have 5-color Slowpoke. It's back, this time in the hands of Ryan Condon, who, by the way, is qualified for the World Championships. Hello. And Ryan going up against that Cookies deck in the hands of Calculator. So I'm very excited to see what happens here. Ryan qualified for the World Championships through the Arena Open, which was I think the last one in, I'm going to say May, but honestly, all the months, all the dates are just merging into one kind of soup of temporal anxiety for me. But I think Ryan top 2'd the Arena Championships in order to make it to the World Championships. So I'm very, very excited to see them back here in playing Arena, playing the Birds of Paradise event, and playing my favorite deck, of course, 5-color Slowpoke. And Ryan going up against Calculator with Symmetry, which is that Cookies list that we saw before. And now we already saw one match with Calvin going up against a Slowpoke deck, Arya, and it didn't go super well for them then. What do you think the other lessons that he'll have learned?
I think so. I unfortunately didn't catch the Simic versus Slowpoke match, but I think the matchup comes down to being a lot about trying to get out of the gate early. Where we watched Slowpoke on camera last round. We've seen Slowpoke on camera a bunch this weekend and otherwise. And really, it's all about getting under the Slowpoke deck because the late game of this deck is just extremely hard to beat.
And we can see that Ryan is already a game up. And she's going to be getting in with Kellen, Daring Traveler. Now, Arya, tell me about the addition of Kellen to this list.
Yeah, so Kellen is something that we saw for the first time really in Jason Yee's list when she played it at the regional championship, and it top 8'd with that. And what the main thing it does is it gives this deck yet another 2-drop that costs 1 and a colored mana for those combo turns. So really a lot of value there, where the deck previously only had Inti and Rona. So the combination of being a playable early game card, which there isn't this deck because of a lot of the creatures in the deck it can hit off its attack trigger, plus being yet another thing on your combo turn is really the combination of those things makes it something that increases the deck's success rate when comboing by a lot, without really providing too much cost in terms of cards you have to put into your deck for it. Because you could increase your combo rate by just playing a bunch of bad cards, and Kellen is the perfect intersection of helps you get better at comboing without requiring you to play bad cards.
Right. And yeah, like you said, just the cheap mana cost. And actually, you know, when you look at the ability, like it's so relevant. Like getting your Slowgurk off the top of the deck, or getting your Honest Rothsteins, or really any of your cheap legends, or even just putting things in the graveyard, both stuff that the deck wants to do for sure. So in this game, we have Ryan with Callan and Slowgurk and Inti on the battlefield. She just found a copy of Relic of Legends. And Calvin kind of is also somewhat set up with the Teething Wormlet Tough Cookie on the battlefield this turn for Calvin. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is live, and how much disruption does something like Soul Cauldron provide against the Slowgurk deck?
It does a lot to insulate Calvin from the combo kill in spots like this. It's just really, really hard to combo through a piece of face-up graveyard interactions. You're kind of pushed into playing a mid-rangey game, and that's exactly why we saw Ryan discard a Relic of Legends, which is generally pretty important to instead opt for this more mid-rangey game against Soul Cauldron specifically.
Okay, so we're gonna see Calvin block with a Teething Wormlet, put Agatha Soul Cauldron on the stack, I guess, to threatening to add another +1/+1 counter on the Teething Wormlet. And you can see Ryan, great technical play, great sequencing, waiting for the exact moment for a Ganjo to deal 4 damage to that blocking creature. And of course, every time you channel a Ganjo, Slowgurk's going to get bigger. And that is a pretty big slime.
And Ryan is just so far ahead on the board here. It's going to be tough for the Simic deck, I imagine. This is yet another deck that struggles a little playing from behind because of how aggressively bent it is. And I would imagine Calvin has his work cut out trying to not die to that 8/8 Slowgurk.
Yeah, we can see Loran is going to get countered by that repulsive mutation. So Calvin gets to keep whatever Loran would have killed, perhaps that Soul Cauldron on the battlefield. Let's see what they find. Soul Guide Lantern, at least that's a redraw.
Yeah, a redraw that notably snipes a land that could have been gotten back with Slowgurk without needing to spend a Cauldron activation on it. So pretty good draw here. Unfortunately, not that good at helping with the board presence issues Calvin has.
Yeah, Calvin down to just 6 life. Slowgurk has trample. Inti can make something bigger as well. And here's Callan, part 2, making map tokens. I'm gonna keep exploring. And is there a way that Calvin can present another creature?
Yeah, I believe Tough Cookie's activated ability will give Calvin another blocker. I suspect a large part of why he didn't use the Soul Guide Lantern this turn is to make sure that he can have a blocker, and given that's the case, he wouldn't really want to play anything he gets off the Lantern anyway.
Right.
That said, I don't know that it's going to be blockers large enough to stop Slowgurk from trampling over for lethal.
Oh no. The oops being extended here.
Yeah, I suspect
was there not a card to discard to Inti?
There was not, and I suspect that was what the oops was about, not stacking the triggers a different way to give some chance of discarding something off Kellen.
Right, but that is still going to be enough. Calvin scooping things up, and we're going to see Ryan, who has been, I know, practicing with this deck a lot, winning in round number 5 against Calvin on Simic Cookie. So Slowgurk kind of continuing its way. I'm going to say, like, it's kind of running the tables, but I'm not sure that an ooze can run. Like,
well,
I'm
It's
not
yeah,
sure. I think you probably need feet. I think.
yeah, that's a hard question. I don't think oozes are banned from having feet, but I can't say what the Slowgurk specifically has one. Has
Banned
some.
from having feet? You think there's like an R&D somewhere that's like feet too powerful for the ooze metagame?
I
Gotta
mean,
like
yeah, they seem like a well. It's hard to say whether having feet is even an advantage for an ooze because it leaves it more vulnerable to feet based issues. Uh,
yeah, uncomfortable shoes. You don't
yeah,
want that.
removal spells
Uh,
like like defeat. I mean, those do
oh my
something against
goodness.
them, but normally don't hit slabs.
Yeah, you're right. That's what defeat means. That's it means remove the feet and the rest will follow. But well, the main problem I think is that you have to have a lot of like core strength to hold your ooze body together to hold. Otherwise, it would just like kind of flow over the side of the feet and then you'll be dragging your body on the floor anyway. The physics of this, I think, leaves something to be desired. So feet not on the menu for Slowgurk. Slowgurk not running the tables, but certainly is doing well in today's tournament. And let's see whether Nile can save us from this insanity by bringing us some more. I believe we have a nice grindy. Oh yeah, here we go. A nice grindy Azorius control up against Orzhov mid range here for you. So it's Miguel here with the wedding announcement being deployed, and we have Sasha on the upper of your screen. She's already a game up, so this is game number 2, and she's flipping over that incubate token. It's just a 1/1, but let's see what she can find. And players empty-handed. Arya, this looks like it's been a slog.
Yeah, and this it's matchups like these are such a grind fest. It's all about going back and forth, turn over turn for so many turns, and trying to be the last one with cards left in hand. So unsurprising that it's gone so long. Unsurprising that we are only in game 2 at this point. But that said, this specific game looks pretty good for Miguel. I mean, given the life total disparity and the Wandering Emperor in play.
Right, but the deuce all of a sudden, and Sasha is going to see 2 more cards. Oh, Virtue of Loyalty. That can get out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah, Virtue, I think, probably ends up cleaning this up for Miguel. It's hard to imagine Sasha at 4 life being able to stabilize against that, unless perhaps there's a counter spell in hand for her.
Let's see. Is there a counterspell? There is no counterspell for Virtue, so that is a lethal attack force on the battlefield for Miguel. And with wedding announcement flipping as well, that's 2 lethal attackers. Sasha really needs a board wipe here. Doesn't have one. And we are going to game 3. So Arya, I am excited. We get to watch a whole game 3 between these two kind of value resource-based decks. And honestly, I feel like we haven't seen one of these yet today. So I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, it's no surprise to me that you're excited to cast a blue-white control match.
Yeah,
Watch some real grindy magic going for 200 turns seems exactly in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, chat can't see right now, but I'm like sitting up. I've got my water. I'm hydrated. I'm glowing. I'm living my best life. Watching Miguel take Hostile Investigator out of the deck, maybe just trimming down on some of these 4s. And what do you think the reasoning behind that is?
Well, given Miguel is going to be on the draw, being Lena will matter a little more for him. Maybe wants to be a little lower to the ground and avoid having too many clunky fours set up. Part of the problem is, despite how that game turned out, Azorius Control definitely has some late game advantage from Memory Deluge providing just a pile of card advantage and no more lies interacting with the late game threats from Miguel in a way that nothing he has access to will do against Sasha. So trying to leverage maybe some early game plays and avoid getting stuck with too many clunky cards in hand.
All right, so we're watching from Miguel's side, but we're going to get to have a look at Sasha's hand along with Miguel. Thanks to this duress, it's going to be taking out either Memory Deluge, March of the Otherworldly Light, or 3 Steps Ahead, one of the coolest new cards printed in OTJ. Oh, second duress off the top.
Yeah, the problem here is Memory Deluge lines up so well against hand attack. It's really hard to play a 1-for-1 game against it, where if both players spend their first several turns not really interacting with each other, not really providing any board presence, then I mean, once Sasha gets to 7 mana, she's gonna flash back that Memory Delusion, then the world is her oyster, and there's not really an equivalent spot for Miguel where even his strongest threats can be hit by counter spells and other interaction, and there's no way of getting as far ahead on cards with a single card.
All right, so Miguel, up to 4 mana, has Wandering Emperor available. Caustic Bronco, the Snorse that everyone has been so hyped up about, in hand as well, and quite a lot of interaction. And tell me, Aria, usually I guess the received wisdom often against control, you're kind of citing out a lot of your removal. What's the reasoning for Miguel kind of keeping a lot of them in?
So I think part of it is when you're trying to play a leaner game, when you're trying to be lower to the ground and lean on things like Caustic Bronco and your cheap threats and duresses, you really want to be able to have answers to the assorted tokens off the Wandering Emperor, stuff like the Shana's Tidebinder, the few pivot threats that come in post-board, like Dust Animus or something we see in Sasha's sideboard, and that's something Miguel's got to be really worried about. So it's important to be able to clear blockers, clear the cheap pivot sideboard threads post-board, and that means keeping some amount of removal in.
Okay, we're going to see Sasha respect the Snorse, telling it to get out of here. Now Miguel's thinking, trying to resolve Liliana of the Veil. Let's see whether there's a counterspell for it here. Really the first big test of what's in Sasha's hand. And that is going to get straight up cancelled. You heard it here first. Liliana, she's been cancelled.
She's definitely, done some problematic things in her past, so unsurprising, really.
Well, whomst amongst us haven't gotten into some difficult contractual, disputes with some demons and then accidentally sold our soul to Nicol Bolas and then accidentally betrayed our friends multiple times. Maybe she's just like me, for real.
That's some heavy editorialization in terms of the use of the word accidentally.
Just sleepwalked into it, basically. Miguel really not finding the lands that he needs to kind of get things going a bit more, but also has a lot of cheap spells in hand, a lot of these interactive spells, and no creature to use those map tokens with.
Yeah, this is one of the risks of bringing in a bunch of removal against control, even if you're leaning on it for your game plan, which is control can then pivot back to not relying on its creatures very much. I think in Sasha's spot, she can pretty safely assume that there aren't actually very many threats in Miguel's hand. There's probably a bunch of interaction, and that means she can just not play her threats onto the board until she has the game locked up. And keeping all that removal dead in Miguel's hand is one of the ways that control decks really manage to get a card advantage, boost, and stay ahead in games like this.
Yeah, really, with these control matchups, the grinding matches, you just need a bunch of lands. You want to always be ahead with how much mana you can spend, how many spells you can cast every turn, and Sasha holding on to it. Memory Deluge, number 1 from the graveyard. That did a pretty good job of refilling her hand. Now she's going to get rid of the Caustic Bronco. And is this the third Snorse from Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, they travel in packs.
Oh, I see.
Everyone knows this about Snorsos.
Indeed. How could I have forgotten? And Sasha really just has it all.
Yeah, it's really hard to keep up with the stream of memory delusions out of blue white. There's really not a comparable card in terms of sheer amount of card flow and selection it provides. And the thing about memory delusions is once you start casting them, you start finding more. So if we see this one flashback, I would expect to see another memory deluge within another turn or two, given how many cards Sasha has looked at over the last few turns. So at this point, all she's really looking to do is actually close the game out.
Now, how can she close the game out? Because Miguel, doesn't have a lot of lands, does have a lot of stuff in hand, and Jace Perfected Mind coming down is going to start milling his library, and we have seen Jace do a lot of work in these matchups in terms of killing out of nowhere with the mill effect, but Miguel has a bunch of answers to Planeswalkers.
Yeah, it's a little awkward than off the cards in hand. The only things that are going to hit Chase or the Wandering Emperor was that one get lost. So I think that's a way that Sasha could start generating some recurring advantage that will trump all the removal spells in Miguel's hand.
Oh, I thought Long Goodbye. Oh no, because Jace.
Yeah, Jace, despite
it's not actually a 3-drop.
Doesn't actually cost 3 mana, despite costing 3 mana some of the time.
It costs 3 mana a lot of the time, it seems. But Long Goodbye can at least deal with the tokens. So that's something for Miguel.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Miguel, spending interaction on the tokens turn over turn is just not going to lead to victory for him, given he's not actually dealing with the source of that card advantage. So, pretty tough spot. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sasha start to really put a pedal to the metal and try and end the game with stuff like activating the Restless Anchorages to get in for damage. But until that happens, it's a pretty tough start. It's a slow, grindy move towards the end for Sasha.
Well, Miguel's going to try his best. Tenacious Underdog coming out of the graveyard. Going to go after the Jace first. This is a bit of a sticky threat that unless Sasha has an exile effect, it can come back turn after turn, and it's going to be drawing cards for Miguel as well. So Jace goes down. Wandering Emperor still up and active. Miguel's going to draw that outrageous robbery. Oh, is not going to draw that outrageous robbery. Thanks to Tidebinder. But Tidebinder does not take away the abilities of Underdog when it's in the graveyard, Ari.
Yeah, Underdog's still able to be flashback turn after turn. But that said, given the amount of mana and the 2 Restless Anchorages in play, I'd expect Sasha to start applying a lot more pressure over the next few turns. And that's going to make spending all this mana on Tenacious Underdog plus losing life a pretty tough prospect for Miguel.
So now Miguel's going to draw that outrageous robbery. It looks like he's still prioritizing the Underdog, at least for now. But as he's... Go ahead.
This makes sense given the Emperor in play. Just applying pressure to that allows Miguel to functionally trade the Underdog for cards on Sasha's side, either in forms of tokens or lands or anchorages or the Emperor itself. And that does a lot to mitigate the cost of playing Emperor and not the cost of escaping Underdog and not playing to the board, and provides a way of recurring card advantage that can, in theory, hopefully, keep up with what Sasha's doing at least a little bit.
Oh my goodness. Here's another Jace. This one is going to be paid with 4 mana, as is his mana value that I definitely knew and didn't forget. And wow, another deduce. Gosh, the blue-white deck is just so sweet right now. It's just very classic, kind of back to basics blue-white control. And sometimes the classics are just what you want, Aria.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, testament to Memory Deluge. Gotta love that card. Doing so much to enable this style of gameplay in Standard that is hard to get. It's for a long time, our control decks have leaned a lot on stuff like planeswalkers, like Teferi Hero of Dominaria, to like provide recurring card advantage. But here, the planeswalkers are just kind of also there, and the deck's very much reliant on just card advantage spells for card advantage, and that's really sweet. It's definitely take on control that we haven't seen very much, and it's kind of integral to the way Magic works and a super cool aspect of the game.
Miguel's thinking, should I kill my own tenacious underdog to stop it being exiled? But ultimately, it decides not to.
Yeah, and we're starting to get closer and closer to Sasha just having lethal. I believe with those anchorages, we could see her attack. I think this might actually just be the full 10 here, where there's a third anchorage that I missed. So, were it not for the removal we know is in Miguel's hand, we could have seen Sasha end the game, and as it stands, probably will end the game next turn.
Right, it is just going to be the attack with 2 creatures. Miguel down to 5. And yeah, this game just really did not work out for Miguel. Didn't really have the lands at the beginning to kind of deploy a bunch of things, and then ultimately didn't have a lot of resources going on. And Outrageous Robbery is a great card, very sweet, but there's just so much that he has to deal with.
Unlikely to be able to steal the game this time.
It's
some
may even like what does he need to find, right? Like you can robbery, like what's the X here that would give him any shot, you know?
I don't believe there is one.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, he's gonna try. X equals 3. Look at 3 cards. And
yeah, I think what he really needs to find in this spot is 3 copies of Cut Down, which is pretty tough given Sasha has 0 copies in her deck.
I see. Well, it was always a tall ask. Oh, what a great emote. This town ain't big enough for the 2 of us, and Sasha's gonna prove that to be true by attacking for lethal, winning out in round number 5 against Miguel Borges on Orzhov midrange. Blue. What a deck. It's so nice. Honestly, Memory Deluge rotating is going to be pretty sad. Like, do you think the control decks will survive the loss of Deluge? Like, what else do we have?
Well, I hope that some form of control shell will always be viable in standard. I mean, some of those archetypes are looking to have perpetually make sure it at least exists. And I think between like all the smaller card advantage tools, like Deduce and the few planeswalkers we have access to, I imagine control in some shape will survive, but what the deck looks like might change quite a bit.